Good morning. My name is Cynthia DeLorenzi, and I am the CEO of Success in the City, and I want to thank you for tuning in to this month's CEO Chick Chat with Gina Schaefer. But to start, we want to say thank you to our hosts, Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman. They are a law firm dedicated to supporting women's initiative, diversity in the workplace. They're recognized as one of the top best firms to work for by Working Moms magazine. So we're proud of our relationship and affiliation to Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman. And if you want to look them up online, they're pillsburylaw.com. So we want to thank you for joining us. And we're filming live today in downtown Washington, D.C. So thank you for tuning in. And our special guest interview is with Gina Schaefer, who is an amazing woman. She's in hardware. I mean, I don't have any girlfriends that are in hardware. Well, unless you consider, but unless you consider your accessories your hardware. So, I mean, I guess you could look at your life as a business of hardware. So, Gina owns 7 Ace hardware stores in urban DC and Baltimore.
Correct.
So, so this is going to be an interesting conversation. So we're going to learn. So let's begin right there. So you're not from Washington, D.C.
No,
you're a little girl from Ohio.
I am a little girl from Ohio. Yeah, I grew up in northeastern Ohio. I moved here, I guess it's been 20 years ago. So I do sort of feel like a native at this point. But
so when you were growing up, what were you like, you know, because I know there are a lot of people, it's like they knew what they were going to do when they grow up. It's like, I'm going to be a singer, I'm going to be a star, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a nurse. What did you
I was not going to own a hardware store.
Yeah, okay, you were not going to own a hardware store.
No, it wasn't in the cards. I don't know what I was going to do, actually. I wanted to be a governor. And then, of course, I moved to the one place in the country where we don't have a governor, so I didn't have that.
Washington, D.C. is not good for a governor.
No.
It's not even good for a vote. You know?
You're right. My political career was over.
Yeah, really. So if you're planning on becoming a governor, Washington, D.C. is not the place to go to. That's really true, yeah. But a governor. I think of all the people I've ever asked what their aspirations were when they're growing up, I've never had anybody say be a governor.
No, that was
it. Why do you think it was? What was going on that made you think you wanted to be a governor?
I don't know. I think that in my mind, president was too hard.
Yeah.
And a governor was of a whole state. You know, Ohio's a big state, so I knew how big it was growing up. And I went to the university, to Wittenberg University, and majored in political science. And then I fell in love with nonprofit work, which is how I ended up in Washington, and squashed the governor feelings. And yeah. That was it.
So, you know, you were an entrepreneur. Were your parents entrepreneurs?
Yeah, you know, Cynthia and I talked about this in my pre-interview. My mom owned a beauty shop in our basement growing up, which was really funny when I think about it. So the ladies with the blue hair would come in and get their little pin curls, and they'd come once a week, and I think she charged them $6
really?
to get their hair done. Yeah, it was pretty impressive. And $20 for a permanent wave, and so the basement in my house always smelled like that solution that they use in permanence. And so she had about 30 customers that came on a weekly basis.
Wow.
And that's how she, I guess, made her bingo money. That's what she calls it now. And
really?
Yeah.
It's interesting. What'd your dad do?
My dad worked for a factory. He worked for the Hoover factory for, I believe, 30 years before he retired, and he drove a school bus. So really hardworking, middle-class family, and he also does a lot of handiwork, woodworking. They make things now that I sell in my stores, which is kind of cool.
Really?
So they're retired, and now they've become more entrepreneurial, and they create things that I put on the shelf.
Well, tell me some of the things that he creates. That's fascinating.
He makes these really awesome cutting boards, which I'm kind of proud of. It sounds kind of silly, but if you've ever shopped in like a Williams in Sonoma or a higher-end kitchen store, and you find these gorgeous bamboo cutting boards that are $200 or $300, my dad makes those and makes them out of a lot of different kinds of wood. And so my mom likes it because it keeps him out of her hair. I like it because it gives me just a handcrafted product to sell, and it gives him his winter money. So,
that's awesome. Yeah. That's very, very cool.
Fun.
So that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you didn't know that. I didn't get that covered in the pre-interview. So there were 2 kids, a boy and a girl, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. My brother lives near my parents and is very hardworking also, but won't move out of Ohio, and very, very different from me.
That is fascinating. I always think of Ohio because when I grew up, I was raised all around the world, and every year or every other year we'd be driving one coast to the other. So like if we're being transferred to Seattle, then we take the northern route through Ohio. And I just always remember Ohio and Kansas were flat.
Long states.
Long and
big.
Flat, yeah. That's what I always remember when I think about those states. And it's always interesting. My sister lived for a number of years in Ohio.
It was a great place to grow up. I really did appreciate it.
Yeah, it's America.
Yeah,
I think, Ohio, Kansas is America.
Safe and healthy and fun and wholesome and, yeah.
So when you left Ohio and you got out of school, so you said you ended up in nonprofit work. How did that happen, and where did you go?
I moved to Washington to work for the Children's Defense Fund. Marian Wright Edelman, who's the founder, was the graduation speaker at my university, and I worshipped her. And so I was so excited to graduate and hear her speak. And I followed her back to Washington. I got an unpaid internship. I waited tables to pay my rent, and commuted from Rockville to downtown East Street to work for CDF. And I did that, I guess, for 2 years, and then I left the country for a year to do something really just different and out of the norm, and I came back and started working for a technology company, and it's a weird random route that I took, I guess, and ended up in a neighborhood downtown that was gentrifying and just had tons of potential, but no hardware store.
You know, it's really interesting. You know, you talk about how the route was like this, and most of us, and I saw this, and it was just a little caricature drawn on paper on Google+, and I think people assumed that the route to success is this upward mobile straight line, and actually with an arrow at the end, and it's actually what somebody had drawn was a scribble. It's like back and forth and up and down and around, and I thought, that is the perfect representation of success. So if you are right now on the route to success, you will have you'll be sidetracked, you'll end up in places you don't know, but as long as you're on the road and you're moving, that's what counts. So just keep moving no matter what, and I think that's normal. What impresses me about you, and how different our upbringing was in that I was very transitional all the life. We were moving all the time. I never went to school more than 1 year in my life growing up. So for me, moving to a whole new location was actually so comfortable that I had trouble staying in a place for 2 years. I was like, it's time to move. They go, why do you have to move? I said, it's 2 years, you move.
Been here.
Know? Yeah, we've been here 2 years. But when somebody like you, who's come from this very stable environment, you know, middle America, to get up and do these things, that's really something. What did your parents think about you being that way?
Well, they thought moving to Washington was a little scary and a little crazy, but they're so proud of me now and love what I'm doing and what my husband and I are doing that it was a good move. I can't imagine living in Ohio again as much as I love it. Although I do think that every time I meet someone at an event and I find out they're from the Midwest, I instantly feel a connection, like, oh, that's why you're so nice, or that's why we just clicked. So whether that's true or not, I don't know.
I think there is. I think our roots are part of defining who we are, and I think, you know, I don't know, they say it's nurture versus nature, but I think there's just a little bit of both, and that culture that we're in, it really does influence us. So you worked at the Children's Defense Fund. What did they have you do? What were you doing?
I was in the development department, so fundraising, which was a great way to get my feet wet just in terms of talking to strangers and asking for things and feeling more comfortable in lots of different types of settings, which when you go into customer service or retail, you really have to think on your feet a lot and be able to answer questions and ask for things and take the punches coming back, which in fundraising would be a no, I'm not giving you that money, or so there was a good foundation, I think, built.
Yeah, I think asking for money, especially for women, is one of the most difficult things we ever have to do. I think it's a cultural expectation. I mean, I always feel, I was raised, you do not talk about money.
Yeah.
You could talk about sex before you talk about money, and you never talk about sex. So I'm like, that's really an uncomfortable thing, and I always admire people who can get out there and talk about money.
It's a little bit easier when it's for a nonprofit and you get to talk about the cause, and you're doing this for the children or you're doing this for X, and so that makes it a little bit easier. Fast forward though, you know, 15 or 20 years later, asking a bank for money to start a business, and then it's really scary because it's, oh, you want to help Gina Schaefer, not you want to help some poor sick child. That makes it a little uncomfortable.
It does, you know, and I wonder if we should ever do a program of how to talk about money. Would our audience like that, you know?
Sure, yeah.
Look what you just did. You caused me to come up with another great idea. Yeah, I love it. Is there an app for that?
There might be.
Yeah.
We'll make one.
I think that is a really fascinating, because it's such, I think for women, is a cultural phenomenon. And I observe, and I don't know if this is true, do you think men talk about money different than women do?
I think so.
Okay, I get naughty in the audience. We've got people agreeing that they think that.
I think so.
That women do talk a little bit different. But I think we have to learn. I don't think we have a choice.
Oh, I think that's the hardest part, I think, about running a small business. You have to know every aspect of it. And for the longest time, I said, oh, I don't need to deal with the finances. I can pay someone to do that, or someone else can do that. And it's really short-sighted, first of all, and it's not a good position to be in as a woman, or as anybody, frankly, because if anything happens and your financial base is shaken, you need to know what to do and how to handle it and fix it, and how to, you know, read all of the spreadsheets and the pro formas and the P&Ls, and yada, all these things that I never thought I'd have to deal with.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, because if you're going to go and you're going to do nonprofit, money's really not. Yeah, I think that's how we're raised. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that you left the country for a while. So you not only left Ohio and came to the big city.
I did.
You then left the country. Where did you go and what did you do?
I really wanted to freak my parents out.
I guess you're doing a good
poor
job.
parents.
Yeah.
I went to Brazil. So my family had hosted 9 exchange students when I was growing up, and 5 of them were Brazilian, and I just always had an interest in the country and wanted to travel. So when I was 25, I quit CDF, and I left, and I stayed with the family of one of the exchange students who lived with me. And she was actually living in California at the time, so she wasn't even there. I just called her parents, hey, I'm coming. And I had met them before, so it wasn't too strange. But I went for 10 months. I traveled around the country and taught English when I ran out of money, and it was awesome.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? So,
phenomenal.
So what were you trying to gain from that experience? What do you think you were looking for?
You know, people joke about the quarter-life crisis. I think I was just so burnt out in D.C. I was working for free, essentially, waiting tables at night. It was a lot of pressure. It's funny, at the time, my rent, I think, was $350 a month, which, of course, is so minuscule right now, but to think about being stressed about that. So I think I just wanted to do something really different. And I have some young staff members now that I encourage to do things like that, because I think everyone should try something once that they're not afraid of. And it's certainly easier when you're not encumbered with family and dogs and mortgages and husbands, and so it was a good time.
You know, I really admire you for doing that, and I don't think you'll ever have regret for doing that.
Absolutely not.
You think you learned something about yourself.
Yeah.
And what you can do.
Yes.
So you didn't fall in love and marry a Brazilian guy?
I did not, no. I did not.
Interesting, interesting. So after a year you came back, and what were you doing then?
I was waiting tables again, I guess. It's funny, one of my colleagues now on a board, the Think Local First board, is Andy Shalal, who owns the Busboys and Poets, if any of you are familiar with that group of restaurants. I was a waitress for Andy, and so he loves it when we get together now as peers, because he likes to tell the story about how he knew me when. You know, I was this little girl, and he had, you know, I had lots of energy, obviously, and so he just loves to joke about how he's the old guy that hired me and got me started on my path to success.
Oh, I
but
like
anyway,
that.
so I waited tables, and I spoke Spanish and Portuguese then by that time, and tech boom was kind of taking off, and I had a friend at a technology company in Virginia, in near Tyson's, I guess, and they needed someone who spoke Spanish and Portuguese for an IBM project.
Interesting.
So I was hired. I don't know if I knew how to turn on a computer at the time. It's embarrassing to admit. But I spoke the languages they needed, and so I was hired.
You know, it's interesting. You never know what skill you may have that becomes the entree into the next thing you're going to do.
Yes.
So don't ever underestimate that. I think sometimes we underestimate that.
Yes.
So that moved you into this exciting new world of IT, which was the new frontier.
Oh, yeah.
It was an
big
exciting
deal.
That was the days when they were writing deals. You'd be at a cocktail party and say, I got an idea for a business, and they'd write it in a napkin, and people give you $5 million and tell you to spend all the money, because that's what's going to make you money. I mean, how we have changed.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember those Boone days. They were amazing days.
It was awesome. We had, so I always tell the story, there were 14 couples that got married at that company. And part of my job closer to the time when I left was to, basically, Julie, the cruise director. So I loved it. It was an internal marketing position, marketing to the employees. And so, you know, we had the game room and the ski house and the beach house and a really big beer budget. And we all played hard and partied together and worked really hard, and of course that company's gone, like most of the other technology companies. So, you know, you take pieces of what you learned from everywhere. So we learned, I think I really learned there how to spoil my employees and appreciate them, as well as
so that was the
manage
takeaway
money.
there.
That was the takeaway there.
The big takeaway was manage money and treat your employees well.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah. So it was a really, really good lesson. And that's where I met my husband. So you go back to the squiggly.
So, okay.
That's where I met him.
And he's from?
He is originally from Denver, Colorado. He moved here when he was 12, so he's been here for a long time.
Okay. His parents moved here, I assume. He
He
didn't just leave and come on his own. Okay. All right. Well, sometimes there are people who do that. Really interesting. So, so you both met there at that company.
We did.
Other couples met. So that was a total of 14 couples that got married?
14 that got married. Yeah, I think that company's been gone, oh gosh, 10 years now, 12 years now. And 3 or 4 years ago, the last couple got married. I mean, it's really, and
wow.
Yeah.
They really should have been a marriage or one of those dating services more than an IT company.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the highest numbers I've ever heard of relationships that get born out of a place. What an exciting time that was.
And we were all young, so it's great to, there's a lot of people that still get together from that company that are still friends, and I think it was a really you know, it's a great time in people's lives when they're like 27, between 24 and 28 maybe, and again, unencumbered and had this great opportunity, making more money than we probably should have been making, and in this environment that was spoiling, and you know, it was the times.
So you moved into a whole new role, marketing. How did you adapt that? How did you learn about marketing? I mean, that's like not really related to what you were doing before.
Well, I didn't actually do marketing. We called it a marketing role. Manager of Intangible Assets was my title, which is kind of...
Okay, manager of intangible.
Yeah.
That's like being a wife. I'm a manager of intangible assets. It's a marriage.
It's everything.
It's, really.
So,
you know, parenting, manager of intangible assets.
Well, it was the people part. So I didn't really market. The company to the outside world. I marketed the company to the employees. So it wasn't marketing per se, but...
Interesting. So you marketed to the employees, which is interesting. So there's a couple concepts that really came out of here. Manager of intangible assets. I wonder if that could become a new role. I think that's almost where our world is going now. We really are managing very often intangible assets. You know, we're making products and taking ideas and we're making them tangible. Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. Really, really interesting. I like that. And then taking on and communicating back to your employees. Do you think a lot of companies do that today?
No, I don't think enough companies do, actually. 2 weeks ago, I was really fortunate to spend a couple days at Zappos.com out in Las Vegas.
Really?
And the reason that I went with a business coach that I'm working with to really explore culture and how culture is so valuable to a company. And the reason that Zappos has gotten involved is they have one of the strongest corporate cultures, I think, that exists right now. And they've started doing this training. And they're also really cool taking over downtown Las Vegas, and they're really spending their money to renovate and revitalize downtown Las Vegas. And so, of course, having been part of revitalization in a couple DC and Baltimore neighborhoods, that was really important to me. So I think, and I went with a group of people who really just, they didn't all get it, which really surprised me because I felt like...
Yeah, why would you go?
Everybody understands, though, that corporate culture is so important and how you're... And there's a couple great books that talk about culture, and you can have a really negative culture. So you have a corporate culture, but it's a
whether you know
one.
or not, you have a culture right now. You live wherever you work.
There is some type of culture, yes. Whether it's good or bad or healthy or indifferent or strong and productive. So... yeah, I sort of lost my train of thought. But
well, we were talking about, you went out, so we were talking about how communications back to employees.
Yes.
And then how you went to Zappos, which right there, that's where I lost my train of thought. I thought, I didn't know Zappos did that. And then the other thing I thought about, oh, wow, she is a business coach. So those are some cool things I heard. So I want to talk about that. Because when you talk to somebody who's really successful, we think, and I think women especially, I think women project onto other women what we think the world is. And then we're like, oh, it's... Somebody like hits us inside the head and goes, you know, it's really not that way. Yeah. You know, it's this perception. I think we always believe that people attain success by simply marrying the right guy, by having an opportunity presented to them nobody else does, by a pedigree, by a college education that nobody else does. And then that's why we do these conversations, because you go, it's never what you think it is. And it's a lot of hard work. Yeah. It's jumping out on faith. It's jumping off the edge of the cliff and you're caught. I mean, it's going to Brazil when you have no business going to Brazil. You know, it's planning to be a governor and ending up doing what you do. So I want to talk first about Zappos a little bit. Then I want to talk about your business coach, because I think that's fascinating. I didn't know Zappos was doing this program. I mean, I know that they've been very much prevalent out there talking about happiness and driving culture. Yeah. But how did you find, and the people, a community of people can go, and so they're driving, they're talking about culture. They think it's so important.
Yeah, they are. They have an entire department now that's devoted to doing training to outside companies. So you can go and do a tour, a half-a-day tour, a full-day tour. You can go and do, I believe, up to 2 or 3 days of intensive training with some of their staff. So we went, I guess there was a group of about, I don't know, maybe 16 of us or so, and we did a half-day tour, and then part of the fun part, they took us all to a local bar in downtown Las Vegas because they want to support local businesses, which I'll talk about the irony of that in a second. But so we went to a downtown local bar. Some of the staff came with us so that we can continue to ask them questions about how their culture is so important. You know, really what they did essentially when they started in California was to take the call center employee and make it fun. So when you walk into their office, and if you could visualize this conference room that we're in, if this were their office, there would be hundreds of things hanging from the ceilings, and stuffed animals everywhere, and books everywhere, and of course products everywhere because they're a product company. And each group of call center employees decorates. They have their own theme, and so it's just like, it's like a coloring book and crayons kind of threw up in their office. I mean, it's amazing. We would walk into some groups and somebody would push a button and music would start playing. or somebody would blow a kazoo. Like, it's kind of a show, but they're so much fun. Like, their cafeteria, all of their food is free, and they have the driver that drove us around. They have a shuttle that will drive guests around, and we just struck up a conversation. He was a young guy, and he'd worked there for about 8 years, which is not typical, particularly for young people these days. And he'd started in the call center, and he decided he didn't like it, but he wanted to stay because he liked the company so much. And they said, "What do you want to do?" And he said, "I like to drive." Okay. They bought a van, and now he drives the van. 8 years he's been doing it. So he's really their ambassador. The second you arrive, if you're a visitor, this is the guy that picks you up. And it's because he knew what he wanted to do, and some of us might not think driving a van is that big of a deal, but they turned it into a really big part of their culture. So
I like that.
Yeah.
That's really an important message.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, and invite people to be part of that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So can you make money, you think, as a company, having a great culture?
Yeah, I definitely think you can. I think that it's in my business in particular, the happier my employees are, the happier the customers become, because that outward reflection. And I get emails all the time from customers who say, "Wow, I can't believe I walked into your store and someone said hello." What a novel concept, right? It's so frustrating. we shouldn't have shouldn't have such low expectations, or so and so answered all my questions, or helped me to my car, or God forbid, smiled and said thank you when I left. So I think that and all of us have stores, I think, that we can think of where we don't like to shop anymore. Maybe we have to, but you walk in the door and no one acknowledges that you exist. So I think that the better, and I always think that when you walk into places like that, it's really a reflection on management. Their boss doesn't treat them well, or their boss isn't treated well, and so it trickles down, I think, through all of your staff.
That's really interesting. I can't tell you how many times we've talked to CEOs sitting in the hot seat like you are today, and they share with us that how many times that there's one person in the corporate environment, and I think we kind of get blinded. Your employees don't necessarily tell you that there's a poisonous person in your rank. There's somebody who's so insidious in their negative attitude, and they don't even really show it. And I think that that's a really interesting thing, and how when finally it will bubble up to the top, and maybe immediately it's not addressed, but the first thing I hear is, one, I should have fired them sooner.
Yep.
And number two, the relief and how it shifts the culture, and I think that that's fascinating.
The Energy Bus, I don't know if you've read The Energy Bus.
No.
But it has the concept, or the Dream Manager, and it has the concept of the energy vampire, if I'm getting all of my books correct. But that's essentially what it's about. If you go through all of the people that you work with and you figure out there's always that one person, or often that one person, that sucks the life out of the room when they walk in, but they're really, really good at what they do, it doesn't mean that they should be there. You
know what, those people are really actually very good. They often own their job so well.
Yes.
That
someone's afraid to get rid of them.
Right, because they own their job so well. And I've been in a company where it was that kind of environment, and it was hard. It was I think it was one of the most stressful environments I've ever been. But that's the master of what they do. They own their job and know it so well they become the owner of the knowledge of the company. Yeah. And then you think, how can we operate? But then you always find out you do. So if you're dealing with that right now, I challenge you to stop and look about it. You will survive. Nobody is not replaced. Nobody is not replaceable.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's jump now. So you come back from Brazil. You work for an IT company. Met your husband. You got married. So what followed after that?
I worked for 2 more IT companies after that, both which went out of business. So I had been laid off.
Okay, so
twice.
If you run an IT company, the word is don't hire you. You have a great culture, but you won't be in business.
Do you think I was the common denominator?
I'm just saying, you work for 3 IT companies, they're no longer in business. I don't know. Draw your own conclusions.
Oh, there goes the squiggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There goes the squiggle,
so, about the time I was getting married, I decided I wanted to own my own condo before I got married. And my real estate agent, who I think I should probably owe all of my success to, told me that I had to move to Logan Circle. And Logan Circle, I think, is one of the coolest neighborhoods in the city. I was living in Georgetown in a rental.
Okay, so you were downtown.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was living in a really nice neighborhood, and my real estate agent said, you have to go to this not so nice neighborhood. And if you knew Logan Circle at the time, nobody went east of really 15th Street. And
I remember that. Yeah, you just didn't.
Yeah, so this was 89. No, I'm sorry, not 89, 98. But I couldn't afford to live anywhere else. And she said, if you want to buy a place, this is where you're going, like it or not. She was really matter of fact about it. And, you know, I still kiss this woman every time I see her. And so I bought a condo in Logan Circle. And I was working for, I guess, the second place I got laid off at that time. And that's what sort of kicked everything off, because I absolutely fell in love with Logan Circle, and it was the best thing anyone could have made me do. was moved to
Interesting.
Logan
So you
Circle.
moved to this place that's kind of not where you're supposed to be, but you
Yes.
know the ownership. And interesting that home ownership was what drove your career. I think
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You never know what it is that's going to make the shift in your life to go where you're going, and listen to that. I mean, that's really important you do that.
Well, if I hadn't moved to Logan Circle, I wouldn't have opened my first store, probably. I mean, I can't even imagine when you talk about that squiggle, I actually kind of get nauseous thinking about what could have happened if I had been able to stay in Georgetown, or if I had moved to Adams Morgan, or if I had moved to who knows where. But I ended up in Logan.
There's a Chinese saying that I often use, which is called, luck is the wisdom to take advantage of an opportunity when it presents itself. So when you think about it, it's really luck. In fact, we just wrote, we have a blog called Powder Room Diaries. It's the lesson of life while on the way to, while in and leaving the ladies' room of life. And actually somebody in our audience was there when we actually came up with what the name of it was. And we just wrote one on ROL, return on luck. So it's a return on investment, return on luck. And that luck, many times, even a bad situation, can actually be the luckiest thing that ever happened to you.
Yeah.
It's just in how you choose to look at it and how you choose to react on it. I thought
The
that
weirdest
was,
things
so
trigger.
go to Powder Room Diaries and read it. It's really a great read. We had one of our contributors write it, so
Very cool.
Dana Thuso, it was really good. But so you moved to Logan Circle and you're married now.
Yes.
And what does your husband do?
I
What
wasn't
did
married
he
when
do?
I moved to Logan Circle.
Okay.
Shortly after, but not when I first moved there.
And what was your husband doing? At the
Working
time?
in IT.
Okay, so he was still on. Was he driving companies out of business
No,
too?
no, he actually he managed. They all. I think the places where he worked are still. Well, he was at. Yeah, he was at Booz Allen. Obviously, they're still around. And,
Yeah, okay, we've heard of them.
another business that isn't still in business, but yeah, he had a better track record.
Okay, excellent. But now I happen to know for a fact your husband does work with you.
He does.
So tell us the day that you thought it was a good idea to own a hardware store. What was happening? Tell us how this all came about.
The last company that I worked for, I was one of my jobs. It was operations manager essentially, but it was a very small company that did biotech physical security. We were in Bethesda, fingerprints basically to unlock doors. So I really liked the concept. I think maybe it was a little before its time, but I was in charge of managing the investors essentially. And oddly enough, people from New Zealand and Australia are really, really big on fingerprints for physical security, or they were at the time. It wasn't a novel concept in Australia and New Zealand, basically. So almost all of our investors were from that part of the world. And I don't know if I have ever talked to nicer people on the phone than the New Zealanders or the Australians that invested in this company. And unfortunately, when the company started to go down the tubes, I was the one that needed to tell them all.
Yeah, that's not always a great job to have.
Another lesson with dealing with hard customers or potentially angry customers, although it helped that they were so nice. So I was managing these folks, managing the fallout, I guess, of the company
So is the
closing.
title, I'm the deliverer of bad news?
Basically,
Manager
yeah.
of bad news delivery, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wasn't nearly as fun as manager of
no.
intangible assets, no. So it became quickly apparent that company was going to close too. So I was, again, going to lose my job. And I had become active in the community association in Logan Circle, met a lot of my neighbors, and I knew that they really wished that there were more businesses along the commercial corridor, which is 14th and P Street, that intersection, if anyone is familiar with that area. So I had been talking with them about what the community needed, what the community wanted, which essentially at that point was everything. There was so much going on. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. But there were a few businesses, older businesses, takeout places that were there, liquor stores, and then CVS was moving in and Whole Foods was moving in, and that was essentially it. Yeah, Whole Foods was a big deal. I mean, we begged, letter writing
CVS,
campaigns, calling,
two great anchors to have in a community that's going to grow.
Yeah, it was. And ironically enough, next to one of them, next to the CVS, was a building, funny building, ridiculous place for a hardware store in hindsight, that was owned by a guy from Ohio.
Huh.
So I knew him. I knew of him. I didn't know him. I hadn't met him yet, but I knew of him. I was sort of in awe of him actually. And I called him one day and I said, I'm going to lose my job. I want to open a hardware store and I want your building to do it in. Crazy, right? Like, who's this guy?
Did you even know what hardware company it was going to be at that point?
No, I had no idea.
So it's going to be a hardware store.
Yes.
Because I could do shoes or clothing. That's fun, but hardware
Hardware's
sounds
fun.
really good to me.
So
Okay.
yeah. We got the announcement that we were going to be closing down the company. This was actually calling the landlord. And I came home and I told Mark, my husband, that I was going to lose my job. It was time for me to own my own business and I wanted to open a hardware store. And he said, are you on crack?
Yeah.
That was his. Those were his exact words, which was a little ironic because there were a lot of crack houses in Logan Circle at the time. No, I haven't gone off the deep end.
You knew those businesses were working.
They
There
were.
were always a line
Very
of people in there
successful,
buying
right.
stuff. So.
Yeah, so yeah, we put 2 and 2 together, and he actually emailed True Value and Ace, which are the 2 largest hardware co-ops in the country, and Ace responded, and we sort of took it from there.